kids. I hope you all are fine. Today we are going to start chapter. So read and enjoy.
Chapter 4 Hellen Keller. Read and enjoy. Captain Arthur Keller and Kate Adams Keller lived in Tuscumbia, a small town in northwest Alabama, USA. They were blessed with a baby girl on 27 June 1880. They named her Helen. She was a healthy child and her parents enjoyed watching her grow. Their family was not a very rich one. Captain Keller was earlier in the army and later he earned a living as both a cotton plantation owner and the editor of a weekly local newspaper, the North Alabamian. Helen's mother also worked on the plantation. When Helen was 19 months old, she fell ill. The doctor said that she was suffering from brain fever. When the fever subsided, Helen appeared to be well, but unfortunately in reality she was far from that. Helen stopped responding to sounds, sight and simple actions. She did not blink while staring at the sunlight. She neither responded to her father's clap nor to the bright lamp that her mother brought in front of her. It was evident to the Kellers that Helen had become both blind and deaf. The challenges and hurdles ahead for the parents and the child was not so easy to overcome. The years that followed were painful and traumatizing, not only for Helen but also for her family. Helen became a very difficult child. She threw tantrums and screamed at everybody. Her behavior became unreasonable and it upset the Kellers. People known to the family advised them that they should be put into an institution for the disabled. Children refused to play with her and Helen became an ill-tempered, miserable and lonely child. With a heavy heart, her mother would say, "Helen's behavior is getting worse. What should we do?" The soft-hearted father would simply reply, "We cannot punish a child who does not understand what she is doing and what she should do." The Kellers now needed a professional guidance. They met Dr. Michael Anagnos, director of the Perkins Institution for the Blind. Michael Anagnos considered Helen's case and immediately recommended a former student of the institution to be Helen's teacher. She was Annie Sullivan, the lady who changed Helen's life. Annie had poor vision herself, but she was keen to work and earn a living on her own. So she accepted the job of being Helen's teacher. On 3rd March 1887, Annie arrived at the house in Tuscumbia and met Hellen Keller. Annie started teaching Helen to fingerspell. She taught her the language of touch. Annie spelled out the word doll, D-O-L-L, on Helen's palm and then placed a doll in her hand. This was the first word that Helen learned to spell. With great patience and dedication, Annie continued with her teaching. When Helen petted the cat, Annie wrote C-A-T on her palm. And when she drank milk, she felt the letters M-I-L-K being written on her palm. This helped Helen to learn the concept of various things and she found a novel way to communicate with others. Annie had to work on Helen's behavior too. Helen was very rude to people. Moreover, her impolite table manners and her social behavior needed attention. Annie insisted that Helen should dress herself and brush her own hair. All this training required great skill and patience. Each time Helen disobeyed or misbehaved, Annie punished her by not talking to her. Helen's communication with the world was largely through Annie. So, she hated the idea of Annie becoming angry with her. Soon, Helen learned to obey and behave well. Annie took Helen for walks and they did horse riding. And Helen enjoyed Annie's companionship. The day Helen learned to spell water, a new inspiration set in and her progress in learning words multiplied manifold. That experience changed her attitude towards learning. That day, Helen was so inspired that within the next few hours she learned the spelling of 30 new words which included mother, and a teacher. Annie taught her to spell baby when Helen touched her younger sister. She even spelled out Hellen Keller. Helen recalled later, I was born again that day. I had been a little ghost in a no world. Now I knew my name. I was a person. I could understand people and make them understand me. One morning, Helen spelled out a complete sentence. Doll is on bed. Motivated by the progress that Helen had made, Annie said, tomorrow I shall teach you to read. Annie began teaching Helen to read. She first read raised letter and later read with braille. She learned to write with both ordinary as well as braille typewriters. She was well on her path to becoming a well-educated person. She was given all possible opportunities to develop her abilities and Helen made the best use of them. Helen developed great confidence and she even visited President Cleveland at the White House. In year 1890, at the age of about 10, Helen moved to the Perkins Institution. Here, Annie continued to teach her. Helen made friends with the other blind children in the institute. Her loneliness began to disappear and her progress in learning improved. She learned Latin, German and arithmetic. In year 1894, Helen and Annie met John G. Wright and Dr. Thomas Humason, who were planning to set up a school to teach speech to the deaf in New York City. Helen attended the Wright-Humason School for the deaf. Unfortunately, Helen's speech never really improved beyond the sounds that only Annie and other very close to her could understand. But the fact that she could communicate was encouraging enough for Helen to move ahead in life. Helen wished to study in college, but before that she had to take admission in another school that would prepare her for college. Since Helen could not afford the fee, Mark Twain, the famous author of Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and some of his friends paid for her education. In 1896, Helen moved on to the Cambridge School for Young Ladies in Massachusetts. This was a great achievement for a lady who was blind, deaf and could barely produce sounds for communication. Helen worked very hard at school and did not disappoint her benefactors. She began writing poems and story. Shortly before her examinations, Helen lost her father. Although emotionally disturbed, Helen did her best in the examination. Annie could not accompany Helen to the examination hall. A teacher spelled out the questions in Helen's hand and Helen typed out the answer. The following week, she learned that she had passed all the subjects. In 1900, Helen entered Redcliffe College, becoming the first deaf-blind person to have ever enrolled at an institution of higher learning. The girls in her class were friendly and they even elected her vice president of the class. Here, Helen began to write about her life. She wrote the story both in braille and on a normal typewriter. The story of my life was edited by John Mackey, who later married Annie. The writing was published in a magazine in 1903 and she was paid for it. Helen once said, "We, the blind, are as indebted to Louis Braille as mankind is to Gutenberg." On 28 June 1904, Helen graduated from Redcliffe College. Helen became the first deaf-blind person to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. Helen now felt that she must educate people on ways to help the blind. Her main goal in life was to spread awareness regarding the poor, neglected state of the blind, their innate abilities and their aspirations. She had to raise funds not only to sustain a living for herself but also to start projects to remove darkness from the lives of other blind people. This she thought she could do best by giving lectures and writing. She strongly felt that she must give the others what she had gained from Annie.